Let's talk about comparing and judging. And what I mean by that is when you find yourself in a situation where you are like comparing yourself to others, right? And you might be thinking, like looking at someone and just thinking, oh, like, I'm not as good as they are at that, or I want to be better at that, or, um, maybe you're judging and they're just showing off, or they're just they think they're smarter than me, and whatever it is, right? You hear these things, and it's all comparing and judging, right? It's comparing yourself to others. It's comparing your experience to their experiences, their karma to your karma. It's just not good. You don't want to be comparing and judging. When you're comparing and judging, that's low level energy. Excuse me. That's low level energy, and you don't want to be in that low level energy. You always People don't walk around and just like maliciously want to do harm, right? And you don't want to be putting out that energy, because when you're vibrating from that lower level energy and you're doing that comparing and that judging, you're bringing your energy and your vibration down. And when you're bringing your energy and vibration down, that's not good for you, right? And so you do need to have this perspective of people aren't just walking around being malicious for no reason, right? Some people are just miserable human beings, right? And this is their experience, their life. They're doing their own thing. It has nothing to do with you. Just move aside and don't compare and judge. Because when you're doing that, not only is it lowering your energy, but you're also putting that energy back out. So now you're putting this energy out there of lower vibration. And that's also not where you want to be working from, because you are here to increase your energy and to be happy and to find all the bliss you can in life, right? And to increase that and be abundant and all these auspicious things. So when we look at why we compare and judge, please hear me out when I say this. It is always tied back to fear, always, right? Because you're in this spot where the reality is all these things are going on all the time, right? Life is a whole time. It just is. And when you're in this space where you are thinking these of other people, right? Thinking lower of other people. They're doing that because they're just arrogant. They're doing that because they're just stupid, or they're doing that because they only care about themselves. Well, that's not benefiting anyone. And really, the reality is there's a fear with you. Let me give you a couple stories and examples, right? So one individual was explaining to me how as they've grown, which this happens, right? When you start going on a spiritual journey, you just by default start becoming a kinder person and start being more aware, because you start realizing we're all one and everything is an energy, right? Like you have this has energy to it, this mala has energy to it, right? And all these different things have these energies. Now, when you start realizing this, and realizing that we're all one, you just naturally start becoming kinder and giving more grace, and your awareness increases because you can feel the energy of things like, oh, my house is happy today, right? It is a real thing. And so when you're looking at this perspective of the fear and where that's at, it's typically tied from something inside you, an experience you've had, some self talk you struggle with. And so when we're having this moment of where's that fear coming from, these stories will hopefully help that. So one individual was sharing how as they've grown on their journey, how kind they've become, how aware they've become, and how much more grace they give people, and how things don't really bother them anymore. And it's like, yeah, because none of that really actually matters. And they're like, yeah, it's crazy. I'm realizing it. And then they were in this family reunion. And in this family reunion, they were experiencing all these other moments of like, oh, okay, I'm glad I'm not like them. And holy crap, how was I ever like that? And then they started realizing that they were passing judgment, right? They were like, they how did they survive? How are they doing things? And why would they say that? And that wasn't very nice. And and they start putting out these projections of judging. And they didn't want that on their heart. But where was that fear coming from? The fear could be coming from, I would like that, and just that guilt and shame and the fear of falling back into it. It could be from um, just embarrassment, right? What if, like, you were bringing someone new to meet these people at this reunion, and now you're embarrassed because you're like, oh my gosh, they're not even behaving. And you didn't have this realization that they were that way because you were so used to them. But now you're judging them because they're not behaving in a manner that you see appropriate. And that's on you. You see appropriate, right? Here's another example in a more business type setting, right? People get elevated, especially nowadays. There's a lot of change going on in corporations. And as they get elevated, they lose track of what the actual intent is, right? They get very focused on it's me, it's about me. And um, when you have a lot coming at you and your adrenaline is going and your stress levels are going up, then what ends up happening is you end up not necessarily always having the best mindset. That's why I'm always telling people to meditate, right? You don't want to be going into a situation where your mechanics and the physiology of your body are overtaking the intent of the appearance of yourself and your intentions, your pure intentions, right? And it's really easy to lose focus in this. So easy. And I mean, I've done it, right? This isn't like I'm special, right? You'll hear about me saying that, right? We're not special. We all have these human experiences. It's what you do and your intentions with it. And so when someone is getting elevated or you're getting elevated and you're starting to say things that are not kind or putting pressure on other people or getting demanding or not being transparent or, all these different things we experience, that's because that's coming from a fear. And so if you're in this situation that happened where somebody was in a new role, they were experiencing a lot of paradigm shifts in this role because they were new to the role, new to the company, new to all this stuff. And then they had all these people that reported to them, plus all these people they had to report to while they had all these things to, it's just like a whole time. Well, while that was going on, they started elevating and they started like behaving in a manner that they didn't want to, but because their stresses were coming out, the patterns that they had in place there kind of deflated. Let's just say it the best way. And so as they were deflating, they ended up starting picking up things that weren't them and they weren't in their higher most self or their benefit or anyone around them. And they were gossipy. They were assuming the worst of people and they were just finding themselves very frustrated and trying to get people to like do things that they needed them to do. And it was like, well, settle down. Let's regroup and let's ground, right? But the reality under all that is there was a fear of failure. They were there was like some imposter syndrome fear in there. There was all these little fears that kept coming up, and it really ended up being self-taught all the way back from when they were a kid. Of like, you can't do that. Don't do that. I told you no. All these types of things we hear as a child, right? But if they're not explained to us, we embed those in our patterns in our brains, and that becomes a pattern, right? And maybe the gossiping pattern came out in this person because they picked it up again from childhood, and that's how they saw adults behave. So then they diverted back to that because they weren't practicing. You have to always practice. You always have to be meditating. You always have to be journaling to kind of work out these patterns, like I say in the Unlocking Your True Potential book, right? You got to dig out these patterns and work through these patterns so that you can break them by understanding them and bringing them from that childhood to the adulthood. Some people call it shadow work. Some people call it regression, right? There's all kinds of names for it. I'm going to throw another one on there and just call it pattern digging. Because really what it is a pattern in your brain. And our brain does that to protect ourselves and to keep us safe from just life, the world, right? And it actually is there intentionally. This isn't a bad thing. You need it, right? That way you don't stick your hand in the fire and get burnt. You go, oh, that hurts, and pull it out. And then it creates a pattern like fire is bad. Well, fire is not bad. it's a construct of like when you put your hand in the fire and let your hand burn, then it's bad, right? But that child pattern remembers fire is bad. So then you have to bring that into the adult mind of your experience of what the physical reality is of that fire. And then it heals this pattern. I go into it more in the book, but or if you're in the program of unlocking your true potential. But the reality is like the pattern digging I'm talking about is going through like, why did I behave that way? Right? What was the intent of that? So when you are looking at your judging, right? And maybe some of these behaviors, you need to be honest with yourself and really look inside and see if they're your behaviors, right? And why you're doing them. And other people, when they have these behaviors, giving them grace, right? And just going, you know what, they're really elevated right now. They don't have the tool of meditation, or maybe they're new to it and they're still trying to like practice. Maybe they don't have ways of outlets to process like pattern digging or journaling or whatever this may be for you. It can come in many, many forms, right? None is wrong, none is right. They just are different forms. And so when you're going through this, give those people grace. Understand that they are just beings, they're souls trying to figure it out too. And they've got karma they got to deal with. They've got patterns they've got to process. And no one's out to get anyone. It's miserable, right? Just someone being miserable and they're trying to process it and cope with it. And so when you are looking at comparing and judging, realize it is a fair fear embedded in you. And because that fear is embedded in you, that's what you actually have to get to the core and the root of to stop those types of behaviors and break that pattern. So hopefully this is helpful. It came up like so many times in the last 3 weeks. I've been like sitting here piling it on, and I'm like, oh, I need to just record this and get this out to you guys, because that's all it is. It's just fear. And so figure out what that fear is, and then you'll be able to resolve it. And then you won't have those behaviors, and the other people won't have those behaviors, or you'll be able to process it differently at that place of grace and realizing that they're just not in a space right now, and it's okay. And to give them the space. Maybe you're the person they have, help them through it, right? I don't know your situation. So, anyway, just have some fun time digging through that.